Who said dictator? Mr. President, do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Hello, my name is Kateryna Soliar, and there will be no usual countdown of time, because here, as in a vacuum, only one time is frozen 24 hours left. Before a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, which will either be in the near future or never. Yes, you didn't hear that wrong. Never. This version was voiced by Trump at a joint conference with Keir Starmer. The same Keir Starmer, who is the Prime Minister of Britain with the same Starmer, whom, I am not afraid of this word, Trump's right-hand man wants to remove from the post of Prime Minister. I am not referring specifically to his right hand, but to Elon Musk. Not so long ago, Reuters opened the backstage of the White House and said that billionaire Elon Musk was holding private discussions with allies to remove British Prime Minister Keir Starmer from his post before the next election. It would be impossible to believe, but Musk, the richest man in the world, I will recall, and a close ally of US President-elect Donald Trump, also supported the German far-right party in the run-up to the elections last month and repeatedly commented on British politics demanding Starmer's resignation. Therefore, believe me, this is true. The Musk, in principle, likes to make a mess in the world. And taking into account all these nuances, as well as the fact that Musk previously accused Starmer of failing to prosecute gangs of men who raped young girls, according to him. When he was chief prosecutor from 2008 to 2013, we didn't see Musk for several days. And Trump personally went out to meet Starmer.
President Trump, can you reach a peace agreement on Ukraine?
Yes, we can.
How confident are you?
We can and will. Thanks.
However, this rather nice personal meeting was in danger of being disrupted, because during communication with the press, which Trump seems to now choose on his own, they were both asked several uncomfortable questions. And I'm not just talking about whether Trump wants to apologize to President Zelensky.
He's coming, he's on his way, and we're going to sign a deal together, probably in front of the media. And we'll have a good conversation. No, we want to work with him, with President Zelensky, and we will work with him. We actually had a good relationship. Maybe they got a little tense because we wanted to get paid.
And also the issue of Canada. However, in order not to get into the destructive, Starmer immediately said that there is a more important issue, and this is Ukraine.
Starmer says Britain is ready to use troops and air power to ensure peace in Ukraine. Indeed, Starmer was just stepping over himself yesterday. In a good way. We know what friends Canada and Britain are, and Britain's supremacy and patronage over Canada. And when Starmer was asked yesterday about Canada that Trump wants to occupy it and make it the 51st state, to which Starmer said, "Don't try to sow division between us. I came to talk about Ukraine, so that you understand how high Ukraine's stakes are for Britain."
Of the main theses, we also talked about peacekeepers at the meeting, but here again we come to the topic that first peace, and then the military contingent. At the same time, each of them admits that overcoming Russia alone is another test for any army in the world.
Between our two countries. That is why, in my opinion, this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security that the world has ever seen. When necessary, we absolutely support each other.
Could you cope with Russia yourself?
We might laugh too, but we are not funny at the moment, because Trump remained unmoved in the face of Starmer's desperate call to strengthen American support for Ukraine. In particular, Starmer asked for support for European efforts to protect Ukraine from any future invasion by Russia, such as US aerial surveillance and air cover. But Trump refused everything. He also brushed off questions about what would happen if Putin attacked again. However, these were public statements. And we don't know what happened behind closed doors. We don't know yet. Because now Starmer is convening an emergency summit in London for further negotiations on Ukraine. The meeting will take place on March 2nd, and next Sunday representatives of 18 countries will arrive in London, including, in particular, Ukraine, France, Germany, Norway, Finland, Sweden and many others. And, as I understand it, the summit is necessary to extend the peacekeeping mission to the sky and to the sea. By the way, the spokesman for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Georgy Tiki, spoke about this the other day. He said that Ukraine is already negotiating with Western partners that the future military contingent, which will monitor a potential truce, will also patrol the air and sea. He added that the parameters of a possible peacekeeping mission in Ukraine can be discussed at meetings in the near future, in particular at the summit of the European Union on March 6. Again, of the two paths that were written on a pebble, remember, you will go to the left, you will get into NATO, you will go to the right, you will have a military peacekeeping mission. We chose the longer one. Although there was half a step left before the fifth article, Trump, by the way, mentioned it at a meeting with Starmer, but again said that it does not shine for Ukraine yet. Perhaps, of course, his opinion will change after the meeting with President Zelensky. It is very difficult to predict anything here. But I am sure that I will still be able to answer one of your questions: where does such a change in Trump's rhetoric in relation to the president of Ukraine and to Ukraine as a whole come from?
To be honest, I feel like I'm being cheated somehow with this deal. I hope we don't owe him anything.
You got it right. $500 billion can do the impossible. I mean the agreement with Ukraine for $500 billion for mining, which President Zelensky went to sign in the United States. I'll tell you honestly, I'm not a big specialist in deals, and I don't have confidence that they showed us all of it, and I have already listed its points to you. In particular, an investment fund is being created to restore the fund in joint ownership, and not in 100% of US ownership, as originally envisaged. The fund will collect income and reinvest profits. Ukraine will contribute 50% of revenues from minerals, hydrocarbons, oil, gas and infrastructure, i.e. terminals and ports, to the fund, but all this applies to new sources of income, that is, everything that is not currently a revenue part of the Ukrainian budget. The United States will maintain long-term financial commitments for Ukraine's prosperity. The fund will invest in projects in Ukraine, and there will still be security guarantees, and they will be spelled out in future agreements. That is, an agreement that they agreed to negotiate.
I looked at the agreement with the United States on subsoil. I consider it a masterpiece of Ukrainian diplomacy. Ukrainians have finally learned to use pretentious phrases that Western diplomats usually fed us to pack treaties, where nothing is clear, but very interesting. The text is better than the Budapest Memorandum, because without real military assistance from the United States, Ukraine, in principle, does not owe anyone anything. And even after receiving military assistance, a lot of nuances will still surface.
If everything burns out, we can write a book, The Art of Making Deals with Trump. Just kidding, of course. Because here, of course, the main question is, why does Trump need this? It's simple. He needs a piece of paper with which he can cover himself in front of his voters when he is forced to help Ukraine or sell it weapons for European money. Since it is predicted that the Russians will bullish and refuse his terms of peace, and the United States is not going to take into account their whims. And it has already begun. By the way, the Kremlin's henchmen have already started going after Trump. Allegedly, he did not mention the name of the UK-US bloc, which the United States includes along with Great Britain and Australia. He either didn't hear the question or didn't understand the British accent, as there were no problems with the clarifying question. But this is the same tactic of Putin, killing in the toilet, that they used before, only then against Biden. With every slightest mistake or slip of the tongue, they use the same thing. So, after 6 hours of talks, Trump is no longer a friend. And speaking of this, indeed, after the talks in Istanbul, he is still unhappy for Putin. Last time they wanted to sign a document on the merger of Ukraine, now they have not agreed with Trump. So, after the talks in Istanbul, it became known that Trump extended sanctions against Russia for another year. A stab in the back, it turns out.
Trump extended for another year a number of sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation for the invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, in accordance with Section 202(d) of the National Emergencies Act, 50 U.S.C. 1622(d), I'm continuing for a year the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13,660.
Executive Order 13,660 of 2014 imposes sanctions against Russia for violating Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. That is, I consider the journalist's question about who attacked whom to be irrelevant. And as propagandists suspected, the US resolution to the UN, where Russia was not called an aggressor, does not change anything for them and did not bring them anything.
These are still words. Although it is clear that the Security Council resolution is something more significant. But I have a suspicion that they are curtsying to us, trying to bend again to some practical compromise. Based on the experience of our country's relations, in particular in its post-Soviet version, with the West, we see that they very often approach this position. Let's throw words that are pleasing to your ears. At least we will sign some resolutions that do not oblige us to anything, and even accept you somewhere back to some 7, or even to 8, and you are for it, and then there are absolutely practical steps. In fact, we have lost the Soviet Union and all the influence of the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe on this.
What did you think? Are you the only ones allowed to fool everyone? I understand that this is different. But still, it turns out that Russia, hiding behind negotiations on embassies, wanted to revive its spy network in the West. The day before, when the US and Russian delegations met in Turkey to discuss the number of personnel, visas and other issues regarding the resumption of the work of embassies, in fact, Russia was thinking differently. However, current and former American officials are confident that in this way Moscow seeks to return intelligence officers to the staff. American intelligence services have long believed that most diplomats who come to the United States are engaged in espionage. Moreover, Russia allegedly requested the United States to resume air traffic and return confiscated property, at least, according to the Finnish television and radio company Yale. According to diplomatic sources, during the 6-hour talks in Istanbul, the Russian delegation asked the United States to consider the possibility of resuming direct flights between the countries. And in addition, Moscow raised the issue of returning its diplomatic property confiscated from the United States, stating that its removal was illegal. Washington's response to these requests is not yet known. The only thing that the parties were really able to agree on was the restoration of uninterrupted funding and the normal operation of embassies. And the agreement was also issued. And as for Trump's questions, I would like to separately thank my colleagues who, unlike the Russians, really know what freedom of speech is. And if Musk did not protect her much, it still turns out that it is too free. Therefore, they decided to limit it a little. The fact is that the White House will now independently select journalists who will cover Trump's activities, which breaks with the long-standing tradition of the press pool. This is a group of reporters who on a rotational basis inform the public about the president's daily activities. For many years, journalists to the press pool were appointed by the White House Correspondents Association. Most often, the pool consists of representatives of CNN, Reuters, Associated Press, ABC News, Fox News, New York Times. Now the Trump administration wants to independently compile a list of media that will be in this very pool. The White House aims to attract new media like websites, streaming, and podcasts. The White House Correspondents Association believes the White House undermines press independence in the U.S. However, we still have the opportunity to find out from them how Zelensky's meeting with Trump will go, and we are also waiting for Zelensky's interview with Fox News. By the way, do you remember that the day before, the publication wrote that Trump allegedly cancelled meetings with Zelensky, but Macron persuaded him to meet with the Ukrainian president under personal guarantees? So if this is really true, then Macron did not stop there. Macron said that Europe should not obey the United States under Trump's presidency. At least that's what the French TV channel reports. The French leader criticized the happy facilitation of European countries and called for greater unity and strength of the continent in the face of American policy on the war in Ukraine and the threat of new tariffs.
I see many people in our Europe who say we should be nice to the Americans. It will pass. You need to bend your back.
emphasizing that the answer is not in submission. Europe should double its support for Ukraine to compensate for the loss of aid from the United States, writes The Economist. Since the beginning of 2022, the European Union and its member states have allocated €138 billion in military, financial and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This is a little more than 0.2% of the combined GDP. At the same time, 0.4% of GDP will not become a critical burden for European economies. This is half as much as Denmark's contribution or the level of Finland's assistance. That is, we have two ways. Either an increase in aid from Europe, or the United States is supposedly with us and friendly, but they do not want to talk about weapons yet. Or increase their own production. And here we again remember that NASAMS is coming to us, to the already known Rheinmetall and Baykar from Turkey. Or, as Donald Trump said, let's see what happens to the peace agreement. Either it will be fast enough, or it won't be at all. Moreover, he repeated this twice, the first time in his opening speech and the second when he answered questions. And the day before, too, by the way, this phrase sounded.
I'm reading it like this so far, my subjective opinion. That if there is no ceasefire, a quick decision to cease fire, then everything else, I mean negotiations on peace and further events, they are not predicted for today. That is, Donald Trump does not see himself in this process today. But that's for today. I think things can change. And I'm sure the US will be part of the negotiations, obviously on peace. Not about this truce, which is now falling apart before our eyes. Let's say that they do not achieve the result. The Russians do not accept this position, they want everything, they want the capitulation of Ukraine. And further those discussions and the information that the US president receives. He may not like it, but these are facts. These are facts that suggest that you will have to move on to a more complex process. He does not want to go to this internally. He reserves such positions for retreat that let Europe assume security guarantees. This is his position today. What will happen next, it is difficult for me to predict.
The fact that he is no longer 100% sure of the deal is understandable. Lavrov puts forward an ultimatum and does not show any readiness for real negotiations. I am confused by this, or it not happen at all. Because it sounds like it, or I'm washing my hands. And figure it out, in fact, yourself.
From a military point of view, I can tell you that today there are some, let's say, changes at the front that would indicate that negotiations are taking place there and there is a desire of Russia to cease fire, and so on. They are not noticeable at all. That is, significant active hostilities are taking place, although we can say that really this week the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrsky, who works directly at the front, in different areas and is very often there, he said that it was possible to suspend some of the enemy's advance and there are such, to be careful, positive trends. But there's a war going on, there's fierce fighting going on. And in principle, the readiness and mood are such that it is necessary to repel attacks and continue to destroy enemies actually. They say that this is what can be said from a military point of view. And, of course, the desire to back up our position with force. That is, to really ensure the opportunity for our diplomats to speak from a strong position. The defense forces of Ukraine are also working on this.
Although, in fact, this is what we have been doing for 3 years of the full-scale invasion and the 12th year since Russia's war against Ukraine began. So we are watching our hands, and according to Trump, there will be a lot of statements in the next 24 hours.